Right. When that particular album dropped, what kind of reviews were you guys getting? What was the feedback on the streets? What was the consumer saying?
It didn't do great commercially. I don't think we expected it to. It's not a very commercial sounding record. Me and Eon have always been into like very obscure hip hop, like album cuts and the 12-inch that wasn't the hit, but the B-side. So I think we kind of made music like that also. And that's kind of what my Twitch streams are like too. I'm doing live blends of, De La Soul album cuts over some NWA instrumental, just because like that's what I've always loved, but it's not necessarily commercial appealing. So I
Right.
don't think we were surprised that our album didn't take off. Of course, Billboard, your sound scan numbers at the time, people were just obsessed with that. How many you sold the first week and all that information was public. I'm sure it still is. So
Right.
people were obsessed with looking at the sound scans.
Right. What kind of deal did you guys have with Ruckus? Was it just distribution, or were they in charge of promotion as well?
Well, we had that label deal, and it was always kind of a tricky situation with that. Like they did this really high budget video for B-Boy Document, but they did it to promote Sound Bombing 2, which is what it was on. But they said, why don't we use it also as the first single for the High and Mighty album? And we'll use that. But the High and Mighty album probably came 8 months later. So the video and song were old by that point. And we said, hey, like, let's do a new video and single. And, there started to be a little bit of discrepancies between us and Ruckus, but those were the times. If you didn't have beef with your label, then you weren't living the hip hop life.
Right. Did you guys initially just sign for one album deal, or was it supposed to be more?
Well, we had the 3-album deal for the label deal. So it was going to be High and Mighty, Smut Peddlers, and then maybe a Cage solo album or just a third album. But we ended up parting ways before the third album.
Right. So B-Boy Document gets picked up in Tony Hawk's video game. How has that happened, and what's your thoughts back then on that happening for you guys?
That was definitely one of the biggest placements we've ever had. I think it happened because we have like a publishing deal. So the publishers are always trying to place your songs in things. I think that's how it happened. Tony Hawk might have been a fan of the song. He's continued to use it in other things I've seen since then. Another big placement was being a part of 1 year for the Madden video game. They had a what was that brand? Clothing brand Echo.
Oh,
they had
yeah.
an Echo hip hop team. So you had to it was like a code that you could unlock on the Madden. And then it was a hip hop team, and me and Eon were part of that hip hop team. So I could play video games with myself, and that was huge. But yeah, around that time, our publishers were constantly trying to place our things and stuff. We had a Cage song on The Wire, which was a huge highlight because just I love that show and I loved HBO so much. So a goal of mine was to get an HBO check someday. So that happened off of that. But it was definitely fun times.
Very dope. Like I said, that album turns 25. Overall, did everything happen on that album that you wanted it to? Maybe the rappers, maybe somebody didn't appear that you wanted to, or, a producer. Did everything turn out the way you wanted to on that debut album?
I think so. I can't remember if there's other people we tried to get that we couldn't. It's so full of guest MCs. I don't think that happened. I mean, getting Kool Keith at the time was like the biggest thing you could do because Kool Keith was like the one who had bridged the golden era with the indie. Him and MF Doom were the two people that were in both eras. And Keith was just huge at the time. So to get him on the album was just amazing. I remember flying out to LA for his guest appearance, and him we paid $5,000 for in cash. And I remember he did his verse and we gave him the money, and he kind of had this like tacky manager at the time. And the manager took the money And right in front of me and Eon started divvying it up with Keith on the hood of this like old Pontiac. He started just putting the $100 bills on the hood of his car and taking his part and giving Keith his part. I said, look at this tacky motherfucker, man. Like what a thing to do right in front of the person who just gave you the money.
Right.
Like you can't wait like 10 minutes.
Did you ever happen to cross paths with MF Doom on your journey?
Yep. Part of our label deal with Raucous is we could put out other 12 inches by artists, one-offs. So my plan was to put out a Curious George single that Doom would produce, but he was living in Atlanta at the time. So we did one session at my crib with Curious and Doom and the other MF.
Grim?
Yeah, Grim. Grim was managing Doom at the time. So the three of them came to my crib and we worked on a couple songs. And then it ended up like becoming just too expensive to complete the project because Doom had to fly up every time. So we had to pay for the flights, and maybe Curious was a little out of his prime at the time. So it just ended up not happening. But there was definitely a session where Doom was at my crib, like on my MPC.
Wow. That's crazy, dude. Remember those days? Was it kind of did you take it all in, or do you look back and go, man, I should have, done a little more?
Well, when you're living in the moment, you always think it's going to last longer, but
Right.
people's hip hop spans are very short, except for some of the people that have had amazing longevity. So I didn't really realize it at the time. I mean, the studio was in my apartment. We named it the motherfucking spot on Lexington because it was on Lexington Avenue in New York and that Jizza line. So I was just constantly having artists come in and record. So I kind of thought it would last, longer than the 5 to 8 years it did. But we were very active at the time. But with owning a label comes a lot of drama, man. It's always the label's fault if the artist doesn't do well. So a lot of the artists we had signed to us, Tame One from the Artifacts, Mad Skills, Cage, they knew what our label was, basically like a label being run out of an apartment with limited distribution and money. But I think people were still like expecting more, like if they're on a label, so there's only so much Tame is going to sell as a solo MC making underground hip hop. But to him, he's like, why aren't I selling 300,000 albums? It must be the label's fault,
Right. Right.
But overall, definitely an amazing experience, and I wouldn't trade for anything.
Absolutely. At this point, I want to kind of highlight your discography. We can be here all night, but I won't do that to you. But if you just kind of, tell me some of your highlights, your best moments of the moments that I'm about to list, and, what you did on those particular projects. The Smut Peddlers.
The Smut Peddlers I'm proud of because it's probably the only album I produced the whole thing on. The High and Mighty albums, we would have other producers coming in here and there. And Cage's first album, I produced most of it, but there were other producers. But the Smut Peddlers was just exclusively me. So I feel pretty proud of it on a production level. I don't have any kids, so I don't have to tell them, hey, daddy was in a group called the Smut Peddlers. That's probably good. It was just kind of, those were the times, kind of doing like shock rap,
Right.
That's what everyone was doing at the time. But definitely from a production point of view, I busted my ass on that album. I would fly all the way to Copenhagen. I had a friend there named DJ Noise, this guy who won the DMCs back in the 90s. And he had a radio show on the national Denmark station. So I would fly all the way out there just to go through the records in their music library. They had stuff called Sound Library records, and that's what we were all sampling at the time. They were records that were made for background of TV and movies. So they didn't have any vocals. They were all instrumental. And it was kind of like the second generation of Ultimate Breaks and Beats. It was all these undiscovered records that we were now finding, and Alchemist was using tons of them, still is. but a lot of the Smut Peddlers album are records I would find in Copenhagen, bring them back home and make records. So I was definitely 100% into it as a producer.
What was the chemistry like on Air Force One?
Air Force One was an EP we did after the Smut Peddlers. In retrospect, we probably would have worked on the High and Mighty more as our main thing, but we were just into volume releases at the time. So I think the High and Mighty got a little sidetracked by doing the Smut Peddlers album. But I think Air Force One stands out the most for the cover art, us in front of the whole wall of our own sneakers. And the sneaker boom was huge at the time. And so we kind of capitalized on that by showing kids, here's our collection. Can you fuck with our collection? I don't think you can.
So, Nighthawks.
Nighthawks was a group album with Camuteo, who's passed away, unfortunately, and Cage. And we made that album in about a week. It was a concept album based off of the Sylvester Stallone and Billy D. Williams Nighthawks album about two cops, but they switched it up and they became Crooked Cops for the album. So it was a concept album. We were really into those at the time. It was just about having another album to put out on the label and tour off of. And we had gotten kind of so good at churning things out quickly that kind of side project seemed very attractive at the time,
Right. In between all this time, there's a misunderstanding with one Masta Ace. Can you elaborate what that was all about?
Well, that one was extra heartbreaking because I was friends with Ace. He's a Philadelphia Eagles fan like me. So for a couple seasons, through my friend John Schechter I was talking about, we would all meet up every Sunday at this sports bar in New York and watch the Eagles games. So then the record comes out and DJ Eclipse is the one who told me about it. And I said, what do you mean he's dissing us? Like, that's my boy. So I call him and I say, Ace, man, I just heard the record. Like, I can't believe that, man. Like, I thought we were cool. And he said, oh, that's you? And I said, yeah, that's the group I'm in. He said, yo, I had no idea. Somebody came to me and said that you guys were dissing us. They said they saw you at a show talking about Masta Ace Slaughterhouse. I said, no, well, that's a Cage line, and he's paying homage to you. So it became clear very quickly that Ace hadn't listened to any of our music. He says, I needed a second verse for the other guy he's dissing on the record. He went on Hot 97 that week and apologized. He apologizes for it in interviews. But I was a huge Masta Ace fan, so the damage was done, and right. I was definitely heartbroken. But we used his line, to me, you sound like two high whiteys, on the new High and Mighty record as a chorus. So wow. It's almost like a self-deprecating, poking fun at him also, new thing that we used.
Right. Did you guys ever get back to, the moments before that, the friends that you were?
I don't think I saw him after that, but
okay,
it was cool of him to apologize publicly.
Right. Movies for the Blind, Cage.
That's probably our most complete album we put out on the label. The most critically acclaimed, I'd say. I think I executive produced the shit out of that album, just finding producers we probably normally wouldn't have used. And it continues to be, I think, our best seller after Home Field Advantage. And I think that album was just like kind of a culmination of everybody's artistic talent at that time. We had all kind of come to our peak. Him as a lyricist, the producers, the artwork, Eastern Conference as a label. I feel like it's the most polished of all the projects we put out.